What's going on, Shield Brothers and Shield Maidens? This is True for Shield's Rest, and today I want to talk about the recent Void update bringing in transformations for Daggerheart. So let's get into it. Alright, so I have already gone through and basically did a little bit of a deep dive for myself and with the Shield's Rest team. And we've already looked at this pretty in-depthly, but I figured we'd put a legitimate video out there on this subject. We ended up doing a stream on it, and we had technical issues as well as me issues as far as running the stream's concerned. So all that nonsense aside, I'm going to try and rectify some of that and bring in those ideas and thought processes that we had while we were actually going through and reviewing this, and giving you a little bit more of our particular perspective, and just to caveat some of this so that way you understand the frame of mind that I was bringing in when I was actually reviewing this stuff and what I'm looking at. I've been playing tabletop RPGs for a while, as I'm sure most of you know that have been following us here on the channel, but transformations are one of my favorite things when it comes to tabletop RPGs, just in general. One of the things that I was kind of annoyed by for D&D, they did not have any transformations until Grim Hollow brought transformations in, and they did it in such a great way. I will put that out there. Grim Hollow did a great job bringing in transformations and doing it in a full spectrum sort of way, and something that I think is rather a great way of going about things when it comes to these transformations, whether it was a vampire or a werewolf or a seraph or even a fiend. They brought in some really cool ideas, and I love that. Love to see that sort of innovation being brought in from other individuals. Love that. But I also have the frame of mind of Werewolf the Forsaken and Vampire the Masquerade, World of Darkness type stuff, right? So I'm coming in with that sort of mindset, but I'm trying to leave all that at the door. But at least with the understanding of, hey, this is what was done in the past. What are they going to do a little bit differently, if anything at all? Or how are they bringing in that themology that we love to see? How are they bringing that in a great full spectrum sort of way? Are they even doing that? And so that was my sort of frame of mind going into this. So you'll get some of those notes and how I think they can be better, and I will try to distinguish between what my opinions are by comparison to what my team's opinions have been. They do have some great opinions, and I think they have a little bit more of a positive outlook on this than I did. I didn't see this nearly as positive as I didn't see it as good as I wanted it to be, I didn't think it was as great. I thought it was good, just not as great as I wanted it to be. So again, I'll distinguish between those two and then where I think this is probably going. So let's start off with the vampire. Alright, so for the vampire is really cool. I actually really like what they've done with the vampire. So as you can see here, they've got fangs and feed. Feed was really innovative, I thought, and fangs were just pretty standard, something you could fully expect to have happen, and I understand how it's a strength roll. Now, the fellas did talk about how they thought maybe it should be a different sort of roll, how it could be presence or something like that. I could see that to the lead up, but not necessarily bringing in your fangs and bearing down on somebody. I think that does require the strength roll. Other games have brought in the fact that, at least through Daggerheart terms, you would need to be restrained. The individual that you're trying to basically bite down on needs to be restrained. Other games have brought that in. I can see how they're going to just kind of cut past that and say it's just a generalized strength roll. Get after it, Just bite the dude, Bite the chick. Whatever you're trying to do here. That is okay. So I understand where they're headed with this. Pretty standard fangs. And then feeding, though. The feed here is pretty good. This is that detrimental side of the vampire, or at least what could turn into a detriment for the individual who plays as the vampire. So on a successful fang attack against a living creature, you can mark a stress to feed, and then you can place a number of tokens equal to the hit points that the target marks. You can hold up to 5 tokens at a time, and then you can use the token to basically turn your fear die into a D20. When you take a long rest, remove a token, just one token, okay? If there are no tokens on this card, all of your actions and reactions are made with disadvantage. And I think that's a great way of going about it for a detriment, a potential detriment. I always love the potential. Basically, if you have poor upkeep, there's the detriment right there. Everything's at disadvantage, and I think that's great. I would like to see them expand upon this a little bit, because obviously a vampire is more than just the fangs and the feeding. I think there is a lot more that goes into vampires, and they are perhaps looking at this as almost like a foundation card. Fry did mention that. He's like, I think this might be a foundation sort of situation. And I could totally see that happening here, where this is a foundation, where you get into your fangs and feeding. But where's the actual transformation, though? Where is the rest of what goes with a vampire? So that's why we're thinking perhaps foundation, and maybe they'll expand upon it later. Again, throw something against the wall and see what sticks. I think that's exactly what they're trying to do here with these foundation cards here in the Void, to see what works and what doesn't, to see if something's a little too broken and too awesome, or maybe something is undercooked, perhaps. And I think there are a few things in here that kind of have that. But again, I'm also now kind of taking that same mindset approach of maybe this is just a foundation card and that's all it is, you know? So Vampire, I do like. I think it's a solid in the middle sort of transformation. It's not incredible, but it's also not terrible. You know, I think it's a really solid transformation with this one card. Perfectly fine. And I think you're going to get a lot of fun things that come with it. You might even call this more of a vampire spawn situation rather than a full-fledged vampire, but again, they're probably leading up to something. Now, getting into the werewolf, my favorite transformation of all time in any tabletop RPG. World of Darkness, Werewolf the Forsaken, you know, getting into that is my absolute favorite one, but I love what Grim Hollow did for D&D, because D&D had nothing until Grim Hollow came out with those transformations, and they did such a great job there. I love the lore and the culture that is brought through within Werewolf the Forsaken. Incredible job, and it just feels so iconic and so perfect. All of that. That is the frame of reference that I have, and it is hard not to bring that frame of reference into looking at this particular transformation that Daggerheart has come out with here in the Void. Werewolf here is not as good as I want it to be, and it's not living up to what I'm wanting it to be, and that's really all it is in the end. It's not that it's bad, it's just that there are some things to tweak, and it feels like the black and white movie of a werewolf. That's really all it is. It just feels like that reference of a black and white movie werewolf is what they're using here. And it's okay. It's just okay. It's not a great transformation. It's not a bad transformation. It's just not a great transformation. It's not one that gets me excited, okay? There are a few tweaks that I think are necessary to bring in. And I think it's because I have this kind of frame of reference that I just talked about. I think it's because I have that frame of reference that this isn't as good as I want it to be, okay? So, werewolf. So, wolf form is what we're starting off with this feature. When you mark one or more hit points, you can also mark a stress to enter your wolf form. This is assuming that you even have control over your werewolf form to begin with, which I think is stupid. You know, it just doesn't make any sense. Why would you be able to mark a stress, and when you mark one or more hit points, like, you can mark a stress if you so chose, if you feel like it, if you want to, you know. If you don't want to, just forget about it. You don't have control. There's no way you have control, especially when you're first starting out as a werewolf. Unless you've been doing this your entire life, there's no way you maintain control over your werewolf form. So I feel like there needs to be a little bit more of a caveat in there. Perhaps an instinct reaction roll if you want to resist going into that. I do think the marking the stress does make sense, especially if you just forcefully want to do it, but I feel like in order to resist doing it, you can't just choose when you do or do not, or let me rephrase, you can't just choose not to. It's more of a, you're going to, you know? I feel like you have to mark a stress after failing an instinct reaction roll. Let's call it an instinct reaction roll of 15. You know, I think that's right about where it should be, especially when you're starting out, if not a 20, but I think 15 is just fine. When you're starting out, bring that in, and then they also mark a stress, because that is a stressful situation. Obviously, doing the transformation would equal marking a stress, but I don't think the caveat of when you mark one or more hit points, you can mark a stress. No, forget that nonsense. You're marking the stress. So that's just my 2 cents on the matter. I don't think that's quite where it should be. I think they can improve, so, you know. But that's okay. This is them trying things out, seeing what works and what doesn't. What, you know, if they throw it against the wall, what sticks? That's okay. That is perfectly okay. We're not going to worry so much about that, but again, just notes for later. So while in this form, you gain a D10 wolf die. Love that. Love the D10 wolf die because you add it to all attacks and damage rolls. I love all of that except for the fact that this requires a little specificity. Because when you say all attacks, this means spells. This means spell attacks with the intent to harm. If you're using a spell with the intent to harm, that is an attack. And therefore you can add your D10 wolf die to it. That's a bit OP. That's a bit nuts. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I think there needs to be a little bit more that comes with this. And particularly Darrington Press, y'all. Let's not forget about the Seraph and the Divine Wielder, shall we? Because the Divine Wielder already has this in their spiritual weapon. Add that to this particular card. Add that little caveat. Specify with that, you know? Add in the fact that it needs to be a weapon attack, melee, or very close range for this to be added in. So that way we're not using spells within this. Because the spell thing doesn't make any sense, especially with the D10 wolf die into the damage of the spell. Doesn't make that much sense. Not fully against it if there's some lore to back that up that we're just not getting from the Darrington Press team here. So if they add that in and like why that makes sense, then cool. But it doesn't make any sense at present. So standing by, y'all. But then this is the bit that I do really like actually. When you would gain a hope while in wolf form, you mark a stress instead. I like that a lot because this hinders the abilities that you have at your disposal while in the form. I think that is a very innovative idea, along with marking the stress instead, which means you're ticking down to when you would hit frenzy. This is a great way to basically action economy the hell out of them, so that way they're not in wolf form the entire time. They're not just walking around in wolf form like a worgen all day long. As much as I do love worgens, this at least stops that from happening, so you're not gaining this benefit all the time. And then there's this, not really a big detriment, it's barely a detriment, it's actually a benefit, really and truly, it's hardly a detriment. When you mark your last stress while in wolf form, you can go into a frenzy. Roll a number of d20s equal to your tier and automatically deal that much physical damage to all creatures within very close range. Then drop out of wolf form. I don't mind that so much. Like, I'm not a huge fan of it, but I think it's because you basically go into this puffball situation where you just violently explode and then you're out of wolf form. There's not much of a detriment besides you're out of stress slots and now you are basically vulnerable this entire time going forward until your bard comes up and just heals all your stress and then, hey, back in the wolf form. You know, like, I feel like there needs to be a little bit more with this, and I feel like frenzy almost needs to go into survival instincts where now the wolf is going into exactly that, a survival situation which they need to get out of, or they're going into like a hunter situation where they're going to hunt down prey. And hunting down prey is not necessarily going after the individual that's threatening. The individual that's threatening would actually drive the wolf away. So they'd go towards somebody that's defenseless, helpless, that kind of thing. Or somebody that they think that they can defeat and kill, you know, basically be able to devour. So with that being said, I feel like frenzy could be a lot better. I do obviously like the idea of when you mark your last stress, you would then go into the frenzy. That's fine. I think the damage is just fine as is, especially with the very close range. You drop out of wolf form. It's okay. It's not very satisfying, I think, at least from a wolf situation, from a werewolf situation. I don't think it's very satisfying. It doesn't feel like a werewolf in the strictest sense of the word. Just because we call it a wolf die in a wolf form doesn't necessarily make me feel like it's a wolf form entirely. I do think the D10 is a rather elegant solution to adding in traits, you know, adding in those trait increases along with damage increases, or, you know, particularly saying that your unarmed attack is now a D10 basically. I think I like the added benefit of not only is it a D4 if you're using your unarmed attack, but you also have your D10 damage dice to go with that. I think that's great. There's a lot here that's just not well put together. I think there's a lot that needs to come through this, but I'm going to approach this with the idea that this is a foundation card and not necessarily the end-all be-all for the werewolf transformation itself. I think there needs to be a lot more worked in here. I don't know, it feels like we're missing out on some lore specific things here that kind of needs to be shared so we can understand their direction that they're headed with these transformations. I can't imagine that this is the end-all be-all. If this is the end-all be-all for the transformation, then color me completely disappointed. But if this is just a stepping stone, then okay, great. I'm willing to wait at that point. Because I think this is good, just not... It's not great. It's not as great as you want it to be. Especially when it comes to a detriment. That's not really much of a detriment, if I'm being honest. Oh no, I'm vulnerable. Let me just drink a stamina potion really quick. Oh, I know this is going to happen. I'm just going to have stamina potions all day long. And guess what? I'm just going to be chugging them back every single time I fall out of wolf form. Worst things in life. Okay? Worst things in life. So Reanimated. Reanimated is super cool. And I think this has a lot of great capability for the long-term campaign. Especially for somebody that wants to just maintain their character and keep their character for a long time, Reanimated is kind of the way to go about it. So, first off, Stitch Up. During a rest, you can only clear hit points if you have access to remains from a recently deceased creature. Kind of up to you on what recently means here. Describe how using this material affects your appearance. You cannot clear hit points by any means except a downtime move or a risk-it-all move, death move. I think that is very interesting and such an on-brand sort of way to go about it because, like, let's say your whole entire arm gets damaged. You can just grab another arm, re-stitch it up, and there you are, back to 100%. I think that's a great way to go about it. I know the guys had a ton of fun with this one. They absolutely loved Reanimated. I enjoy Reanimated as well. I thought this was a great idea. I think there needs to be a little bit more as far as what Reanimated could legitimately be. We were talking about how there should be, and I was thinking about this for a while here because of the adversaries, the skeletons, the different skeleton adversary stat blocks there are, they have resistance to physical damage. Maybe Reanimated should get that too. Just an idea, but maybe they ought to fit that in somewhere here and there. I feel like there's enough space in there to kind of reword that a little bit to where they could add that in. But yeah, I think they ought to add that in. But otherwise, I mean, I think it's good. I think it's really good. Same goes for Corpse. Corpse is really solid here. Just the whole card for Reanimated is pretty good. So for Corpse, when you risk it all on a death move, if you fail, you can permanently mark a hit point to succeed instead. When you do, you still use the hope die's value to clear hit points and stress. That I like a lot because then it's just willing your Reanimated self to continue on by losing something completely. And I feel like there's some great roleplay possibilities within that as to what is lost for that one hit point. Like, did you lose a finger? Are we losing an entire forearm here? Did you get cut off at the foot or something? Like, what are we talking about? I feel like there's some fun things that you can do here. Maybe you've lost the ability to process food in some way, shape, or form, you know? Like, or liver, like you can't process alcohol anymore. Joe was doing that kind of thing in our actual play for this. I was like, what in the world? So yeah, I thought it was a great idea, but I think there's some great roleplay opportunities there. If you want to, obviously, which I think you should, especially as a Reanimated corpse. Now for the Shapeshifter. The Shapeshifter is kind of a cool one, and I think one that is meant for like specific classes almost, for those very charismatic classes and those classes that are trying to get into places that they're not supposed to be. I think Shapeshifter would be a lot of fun. Now, obviously, you may not be able to choose what your thing is, but you also might be able to, especially if you're starting a campaign where you all are transformations of some kind, right? So I think there's a lot of ways to go about this, and maybe we'll start incorporating some of this into our class build series when we start going off the rails a little bit more. But Shapeshifter, I think, is really good because change shape during a long rest, which I think should be a short rest, but neither here nor there. But during a long rest, you can spend a downtime move to swap your current ancestry with another. When you do, describe how your appearance changes. Again, I think this is more of a short rest sort of situation because as a shapeshifter, I think you would be able to do so. But I feel like there needs to be that intention to do so. So like during your short rest, you're almost taking that down, like you are taking that downtime move, but you're really taking the entire short rest to go about changing your form. And maybe that's when you actually have access to an individual that looks exactly like what you're going for. Kind of like in The Witcher, where there was that shapeshifter that kind of took the shape of, whoever he ended up killing. Like, I thought that was a great idea that you could almost bring in with Shapeshifter here. And then only skin deep. What a name. What a name. What a title for a feature. I love that. When you change shape, you only gain the benefit of one of the Ancestry's features, which you select when you choose the Ancestry. You can spend a downtime move to switch which of the Ancestry's features you gain the benefit of. I do like that. I think that perhaps the long rest is good with the short rest being with the only skin deep. I do like that. I could see them trying to rework this just a little bit, but it might actually work out better the way that they have it. Again, I think this requires a little bit more play testing. I think we definitely need to get more into the Shapeshifter side of things, and I know we're going to try and do essentially a play test, a small like 3-session arc for each transformation, just to kind of see how it plays out in a long-term sort of fashion. But I like the Shapeshifter a lot. I think there's a lot of good things here, especially with only being able to take one of the Ancestries, but you get to keep shifting around and taking one of those Ancestry features. So I think there's a lot that can be worked in here. And I think from a roleplay perspective, this has a lot more benefit than what the Ancestry feature that you take is. I think there's a lot more benefit to it than just that Ancestry feature. And I think that comes in the form of how you utilize the form that you take. So looking at Ghost, Ghost is just all around bad, and not because the card's bad, but because you're a damn ghost. Like, it sucks to suck. You died, and for whatever reason you are now a ghost. There's a lot of detriment to being a ghost, like a ton of detriment to being a ghost, which can be a lot of fun. So spirit form. Your physical form can shift between corporeal and incorporeal. Mark a stress to transition into and out of your spirit form. While in spirit form, you can move through solid objects, are immune to physical damage, and take double magic damage. You can spend 2 hope to attack or physically interact with the material world. Now again, this is between 2 different forms. I do like that you can shift between the 2, but while you are shifted into a more spirit form, you have a lot of detriment. Especially that 2 hope just to be able to interact with the physical world or make an attack. I do like that, and I don't at the exact same time because it feels like a heavy cost, but for whatever the situation is, that might actually be worth it. I see that playing out in a lot of fun ways. And so I would love to eventually get more into playing as a ghost and actually GMing for a bunch of ghosts. That I'm excited for. But at any rate, there's also Ephemeral. Cross out a hit point slot when you do take this card and when you increase your tier, which here comes the massive detriment, the actual full-on detriment. When you mark your last hit point, you must choose Blaze of Glory as your death move. That's just like, you're done. Like, there's no way to do this any other way, you know? And kind of like the way Frenzy kind of makes you explode into a furball, this is just making you explode into, like, just plasma or whatever the heck you want to call it. You know, you can just reference any other ghost movies that are out there, and essentially it works out in the same way when it comes to that Blaze of Glory. But at least you get to go out with some fun. So I do think there's a lot of great roleplay that can happen with a ghost. So again, this is going to be a lot of fun, and I think this is going to be perfect for any Halloween special that you guys do, or perhaps even just in a normal campaign where this could come up. Especially if one of your players isn't exactly ready to let go of that character. Or maybe there was something that they were so driven for that they hadn't completed yet. And then that becomes their one focus and only focus. I think that'd be an interesting way to go about it too, and maybe a great driver of the story itself through the ghostial character, the ephemeral character that is now embodying, that's now being embodied at the table. I think that's an interesting idea for sure. All right, so looking at Demigod. Demigod can be unhinged. This is really cool. So, Ichor of the Gods. Your advantage die is always a D10 instead of a D6. That's insane, especially for a druid. I think Fry was completely right on this one. For a druid, this would be insane. And it's because they gain advantage on so many different things in their forms, and it's always a D10 on top. We better hope that they're reworking transformations for the for the druid, those beast forms, because that's insane. Just right there alone, it's already insane for the druid as is because of the amount of advantage that they get and just the way that they can essentially get so much more added into their stat block that wasn't there before because of those beast forms. Demigod is only going to enhance that even further. With Weight of Divinity, when you roll a failure with fear, you must mark a stress or give the GM an additional fear. To me, that is a good detriment right there. That is a great detriment. That is something that gives not only the player the choice to choose whether they'd rather take the stress or give the GM an additional fear, but it makes that failure with fear just that much more detrimental. Not that it's going to happen all the time, not that it's happening that often, but it's going to happen often enough to where that detriment can actually mean something. But same goes for the advantage that they're going to take. So they're almost always going to hit. They're almost always going to hit. So, yeah, cool. Love Demigod. Love these transformations, okay? Love these transformations. I do think that this is just a great way of bringing in transformations in this card sort of way, so you can just kind of have that seated next to your character. And I would love to see them do, because I know they've been talking about doing class packs, but I'd love to see them do a transformation pack that just has all the transformations, all the transformation cards in one pack, so that way the players can just grab that, or the GM can just grab that and have at the table when they want to use transformations in their game, and then they can hand the player that one card that they can just attach to, next to their character sheet. I think that's great. So, absolutely love transformations. I think this is a great start. I don't think this is complete by any stretch of the imagination. There is so much more that they have yet to unlock with these transformations. I think there's so much more that still needs to be brought in. And I think they could do it by tier, or they could do it in the same fashion as the subclasses with the Foundation, Specialization, and Mastery. I prefer to see it by tier, mainly because that way at each tier you're actually feeling like you're gaining something out of it, but also that detriment gets more severe as you go more full into it. And maybe that is a level up option, or maybe that's just something that is kind of decided upon between the GM and the player. Either way, I like the potential this has, and I like the ideas that I've been able to gain from this as far as a lot of these transformations are concerned, particularly for Vampire, and even for Werewolf. I may have a lot of negative things to say about the Werewolf transformation, but that's just because I care. That's all it is. It's just because I care. But I think there are some good things that come from it. So, again, very curious to see what happens in the future, but yeah, hopefully we see more updates here in the Void for transformations. So until the next one, keep that shield wall strong.